So I haven't made a video for a while, sorry about that. You probably haven't noticed, but I did get a few people asking me, are you going to make a video about The Last Jedi or Infinity War? But I didn't really feel like I had much to contribute to that conversation, so I just stayed silent. However, I do feel like I have something to say about Solo: A Star Wars Story, so buckle up, baby. Now, usually when I make these sort of videos, I call it an I love video. I love Spider-Man, I love James Bond, but I don't think I can do that with Star Wars because my relationship with it has been complicated. The first one I ever saw was The Phantom Menace when I was 7 years old. My dad took me to see it at the cinema, and halfway through I turned to him and went, Dad, I've had enough now, can we go? After that, I didn't really pay attention to Star Wars until The Force Awakens came out, and that's when I got it. I was like, I understand now why people care about this. And since then, I think I can call myself a fan. I don't have a connection to the original films because I didn't grow up with them, but I certainly have an appreciation for them. I enjoyed Rogue One, I loved The Last Jedi, even though all the men in it were really weak and it was clearly a feminist propaganda film. But I looked past that. So it goes without saying that I was looking forward to the Han Solo film, and like everyone else, I was following all the behind the scenes drama, but if for some reason you don't know, the original directors were Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who directed the Lego Movie and 21 Jump Street and 22 Jump Street and the pilot to Brooklyn Nine-Nine, by the way. But because of creative differences, they were fired before production had ended, and Ron Howard was hired to finish the job. Without getting into the politics of what happened behind the scenes, because, you know, who's interested in that? There was a massive director change in this movie, and I was wondering what that was like for you as a director, someone who's like so established. Like, was it an exciting challenge to come in and sort of pick it up?
It was an exciting challenge. Of course, I wouldn't have done it if I didn't really believe in the story. And it did begin for me as a sort of exercise in professionalism. You know, could I come in and help realize the potential of this story given this unfortunate circumstance of the creative differences creating the schism. Even though Phil Lord and Chris Miller's fingerprints are all over the movie in ways that I really am grateful for.
I agree. I think that Lord and Miller's fingerprints are all over this film, but especially in the very, very first scenes, the one with the big queen worm. I would bet money that that's a Lord and Miller scene. It almost plays out like the characters are aware that they're in a Star Wars movie, but the rest of the film is a lot more earnest than that, and those two tones they're quite conflicting. I would hazard a guess to say that one of the creative differences were that Lord and Miller wanted to spoof Star Wars in a Star Wars movie a lot more than Lucasfilm were comfortable with, but you know, that's just a guess. Now, this is not the first film to have major problems behind the scenes, not even in the last year, but my favourite film ever is Back to the Future, and I don't know if you know this, but halfway through filming that, they changed who was playing Marty McFly. If Back to the Future was coming out in an internet age, there would be headlines everywhere saying that the film was doomed, and yet it turned out perfect. So the behind the scenes of Solo was interesting to me, but it didn't mean that the film was inevitably going to be a disaster. That said, I didn't like it. I'll start with some positives. The cast overall do a pretty good job. Alden Ehrenreich is a very worthy follow-up to Harrison Ford as Han Solo. He never feels like he's doing an impression, but you can sort of tell he feels like he's sort of restricted by what we already know about the character, so he doesn't get the chance to try anything new. Donald Glover is obviously good, is that even worth mentioning? And it was nice to hear Phoebe Waller-Bridge in a Star Wars movie. Side note, if you haven't seen Fleabag, fix that immediately. The action scenes were all pretty fun, the Kessel Run being my favourite part. It was probably my favourite part of the whole film, actually. All the characters were working together, solving problems, narrowly avoiding danger. It was just a really fun, engaging set piece to watch.
I liked the way it answered the questions of, you know, what were the relationships that might have defined Han Solo? What were the adventures like? And I thought it answered them in ways that was very satisfying, but also surprising.
When this film was announced, a lot of people immediately took against it, saying things like, why do we need an origin story for Han Solo? We already know everything we need to know about that character when we meet him in A New Hope. And I agree, but you could say the same thing about James Bond. We don't need an origin story for that character, but we got one in Casino Royale, and it's undoubtedly one of the best films in that franchise. And I think that's what this should have been. I thought that's what this was going to be. Casino Royale for Han Solo. There's a part of the film where Han Solo says, I've got a really good feeling about this. yeah, I get it, because he usually says the other thing. But I was expecting that exploitation of nostalgia to be a cleverly covered up character point. I want to know how he goes from being a man who says I've got a really good feeling about this to the man who says I've got a really bad feeling about this. What happened to this wide-eyed, optimistic adventurer to make him the cynical scoundrel that we know from the original Star Wars films? I still want to know. because it's not answered in this film. Obviously, Disney own this and the Marvel franchise, and the Russo brothers keep slipping in lots of Arrested Development references. Were you ever like tempted, or are there some in there that we haven't noticed?
No Easter eggs.
Yeah, that would be really nice. Just in the background of space somewhere, just a little Bluth logo.
I should have thought of that.
Yeah.
If I had talked to the Russos and known they'd done it, I would have.
If you've seen the film, you know that there's a certain character that pops up. I'm not going to spoil it, but if you've seen it, you know who I'm talking about. You can't miss it. I think even some of the most passionate of Star Wars fans will leave wondering how this character can be in this movie or where in the timeline it takes place. It leaves you with more questions than answers, and maybe I'm just being old-fashioned, but I don't think I should have to Google if the film makes sense. Your reaction to seeing that character was supposed to be this. But instead, I think what most of us did was this. Huh? How is he... I thought he was... Why would he... Maybe it's from the TV shows or something. I know, I'll Google it later. Overall, Solo, A Star Wars Story is kind of exactly what you're expecting, and I think that's my biggest problem with it. It doesn't do anything especially interesting or exciting, but it's not offensive in any way. I don't think the issues with it can be entirely blamed on the production problem. I'm not sure if you can point the finger at anyone in particular. I certainly don't think that Ron Howard is a bad director, nor do I think that Lord and Miller are. It's by no means terrible, it just doesn't justify itself. It needed to answer the question, do we need a Han Solo origin story, with a confident yes? And it doesn't. Well, Ron Howard, thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
Pleasure.
Take care.
Thank you, Jack.
Good to see you.
Likewise, nice to see you too.